Taiwan's gearing up to propose a record special budget to boost its defense.
它是7年期，那它的规模来到1.3兆台币，其中前4年是支付的高峰期。
Dodging the draft, investigators look into a scheme that saw almost 100 people avoid conscription. Japan's new prime minister has been voted in. What does this mean for Taiwan? Plus, China's top political leaders gathered for a major political conference. We ask an expert what to expect from the meeting. Good evening and welcome to Time Plus News. I'm Eric Gao. The debate over Taiwan's military funding has gained attention both at home and abroad. The country is now set to propose a record special defense budget, and as Alan Liu reports, part of it will be used for the newly announced T-Dome air defense system.
Taiwan is preparing to spend big, with a new special defense budget that could reshape how the country prepares for conflict. At this year's U.S.-Taiwan Defense Industry Conference, Taiwanese lawmakers laid out plans to budget an additional $40 billion for defense in the coming weeks.
我们国家政府会提出来一个新的国防特别预算，它是7年期，那它的规模来到1.3兆台币，其中前4年是支付的高峰期。
Wang says U.S. President Donald Trump's administration has pressed allies to take responsibility for their own defense. Taiwan's special budget, he says, will not only strengthen U.S.-Taiwan cooperation, but also open opportunities for collaboration in the defense industry supply chain. Taiwan's Defense Minister Wellington Koo later confirmed the budget's time span of 7 years, but said the final amount hasn't been decided. The extra spending comes as the U.S. and Taiwan continues plans for a T-Dome, a new air defense system announced by President Lai Ching-te on National Day.
我想，就整个防空系统是当然我们建军里面的一个重要的一个事项。那双方会在这个部分有所讨论也是当然的。那我们会在这个年底之前提出的特别预算里面会说明。
Back in the U.S., State Department officials are also revealing plans to release new global guidelines aimed at speeding up the review process and expanding access to defense technologies. That's according to people with knowledge of the matter.
The U.S. government is going to release new global guidelines, not just Taiwan guidelines, but global guidelines to expedite consideration and then releasability of technology for defense partners, including Taiwan.
But it might not be easy to get the special budget clear in the legislature, where the ruling party does not hold a majority. Still, the government hopes these plans will help Taiwan stand on its own 2 feet when it comes to defending itself. Justin Wu and Alan Liu for Taiwan Plus.
Taiwan is investigating nearly 100 suspected cases of evading conscription. Suspects are thought to have faked medical conditions such as high blood pressure to avoid their service. Our reporter Larry Isiano has the latest.
A scandal involving Taiwan's mandatory military service is topping local headlines. Authorities are looking into dozens of suspected cases of using falsified medical information to evade conscription, a serious offense that carries harsh penalties, including prison time. It comes as several celebrities are already in the spotlight after getting caught dodging their service. It's a serious issue for the government, which has been pushing to boost Taiwan's defenses in the face of increasing military threats from China. Part of those efforts has been extending the length of conscription from the previous 4 months to 1 year under former President Tsai Ing-wen. On Wednesday, Interior Minister Liu Shifang said the government would start tackling this by tightening up rules for skipping out on service. She said the exemption rate for conscripts in 2023 reached 16%, much higher than in South Korea and Singapore, where exemptions only account for around 5%. And the reasons people gave for being unfit for duty also do not match Taiwan's national health insurance data. She said the government would go easy on people who admitted to faking their way out of conscription.
高血压还有增重扁平足视力都是在这一次 这个由地检署他们发动要侦查的时候，为什么会出现这种假的病例啊？会把这个体位的这个标准或者是检测哈，不要出现漏洞的部分，会给它补齐。
National Defense Minister Wellington Koo said his ministry would also move to strengthen guidelines and testing practices to avoid similar cases in the future.
大部分人好像都有一个假冒高血压的这个状况，所以我们就他复检的时候，要来住院，带那个做24小时的检测，这样避免由枪手来代替来挂那个监测的那个仪器。
The government says the recent suspected draft dodging cases took place before testing methods were improved. But it says the Defense Ministry is working with all branches of the armed forces and medical professionals to create stricter standards, with new regulations expected for next April. Patrick Chen and Larry Ciano for Taiwan Plus.
Authorities are looking into a suspected case of African swine fever at a farm in central Taiwan.
请农业部在台中设立前进指挥所，我们要进行有效的防范措施，提出各项积极应变的计划，也要应尽我国在国际上的义务，向国际做出必要的通报。
The Premier ordered authorities to keep pork prices stable and assured the public that all pork on the market is safe. The Agriculture Ministry says the affected farm in Taichung observed pigs dying 2 weeks ago, but waited 10 days to test for African swine fever. Authorities have banned using kitchen waste as pig feed and paused all transport and slaughter of pigs for the next 5 days. In May, the World Organization of Animal Health declared Taiwan free of all 3 major swine diseases. Japan's new Prime Minister, Takaichi Sanae, says she's ready to get to work. While domestic issues will take up much of her attention, her foreign policy is attracting attention too in places like Beijing. Her past indicates that Taiwan may have a friend, if only an unofficial one, in Takaichi. John Van Trieste reports.
Japan's new Prime Minister, Takaichi Sanae, is flanked by her cabinet for a group photo. With just 2 other women in the group, this might not be quite the glass ceiling moment some had expected. Still, Japan's first woman Prime Minister has arrived. She says she's ready to dive into the job.
I'm firmly determined to build a strong Japanese economy and to protect Japan's national interest through diplomacy and security.
In her hometown, Nara, it's Japan's domestic problems that are on most people's minds, and they hope Takaichi will help turn them around.
Prices have gone up and it's tough. Honestly, I mostly shop at 100 yen shops now. It's hard to get by. I hope she'll pay attention to that. But she's mostly in Tokyo, right? She doesn't come to Nara much. I'd like her to support Nara much more.
Support for childcare and help for women returning to work after having children. I hope there will be more policies in those areas.
But from Trump's tariffs to relations with powerful China next door, Takaichi has a lot to do on the diplomatic front too. With neighbors like China, her nationalist politics may cause irritation. She's known to visit this controversial place, Yasukuni Shrine, where Japan's war dead are remembered. They include convicted war criminals from World War II. And she's a close friend of Taiwan, too. On a visit in April, she even met with President Lai Ching-te. Beijing says her selection as prime minister is an internal Japanese affair, but urged her to hold the line on political documents Japan and China have signed, including on issues like Taiwan.
希望日方同中方相向而行，恪守中日4个政治文件各项原则，信守在历史、台湾等重大问题上的政治承诺，维护双边关系政治基础，全面推进中日战略互惠关系。
In Taiwan, though, there's confidence that Takaichi will bring closer ties with Japan.
特别是对打造民主的非红供应链，能够密切合作。另外，我们也期待在台湾争取参加 CPTPP 能够得到日本政府更大的这个支持。
Among the things Takaichi has suggested is a regional quasi-security alliance that would include Taiwan, as well as closer cooperation in tech. If Takaichi's past is any indication, informal ties with Taiwan could grow under her premiership. Howard Zhang and John Van Trieste for Taiwan Plus.
The main opposition Kuomintang recently voted in former legislator Zheng Liwen as its new party chair. Zheng has vowed closer ties with China at a time when Beijing's tensions with Taipei and Washington are running high. To understand how the U.S. might view Zheng's win, Leslie Liao spoke with Karis Templeman, a research fellow at the Hoover Institution from Stanford University.
Now, what are U.S. policymakers watching for after Zheng Liwen's win?
Zheng Liwen herself has said she doesn't support increasing defense spending above 3% of GDP. And that's a very kind of concrete thing that Washington has been pushing on Taiwan. And so I'll be watching closely to see what the KMT Legislative Caucus's position is on special budgets to purchase weapons from the United States or to fund a significant increase in the defense modernization. The KMT, rightfully in Washington, has a reputation as being the party that can talk to Beijing, and so they'll be interested in seeing where her communication with the other side of the strait goes. And then third, actually, is on trade and more generally the economic relationship. A lot of KMT high-level KMT people have been quite critical of the Lai administration's trade negotiations with the United States, and to some degree, their willingness to talk about investments in the semiconductor industry in the United States. And so,
now, even though the KMT is an opposition party, will Zheng's win affect the U.S.'s decision-making towards Taiwan at all?
In the short run, I don't think so, no. The more interesting question is what happens in about a year when we have the local elections and the impact of those elections on perceptions of who's going to win in 2028. I know there's a narrative in Taiwan right now that's actually quite pessimistic about President Lai Ching-te's chances in 2028 for re-election. I don't think that narrative is quite as widespread in Washington, but if the KMT sweeps all the competitive races in 2026, that would get a lot of people's attention, and I think focus a lot of people much more on what a potential KMT successor to Lai Ching-te would look like.
What kinds of challenges will Zheng face moving forward?
Well, I think first she's got to strike a balance in her rhetoric about cross-strait relations. This is the challenge that every KMT party chair has struggled with. Second, the KMT looks like they're probably the favorites in a lot of the races in 2026, but only if they can strike some kind of cooperation agreement with the TPP. And as we all know, the attempt to run a joint campaign in the 2024 presidential election fell apart. And so the chair's number one prerogative, I think, for the next year is to prevent that kind of breakdown from happening again in, blue-white cooperation. And then third, she has to continue to try to build the KMT's or rehabilitate the KMT's image among younger swing voters. I think that's really the critical group that could swing back to the DPP in 2028.
That was Karis Templeman, a research fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. The heads of China's ruling Communist Party are meeting in Beijing as part of its so-called Fourth Plenum, the party's most important political gathering of the year. The closed-door meetings will help set the country's policy for the next 5 years. It comes as China's economy has seen slowing economic growth and trade tensions with the U.S. The meeting follows the firing of 8 top generals from the party last week in a major political purge. All eyes are now on next week's APEC summit in South Korea, where Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump, though Trump says those talks could still be called off. For more on the CCP's Fourth Plenum, reporter Chris Gorin spoke with Jonathan Zinn, the Michael H. Armacost Chair in Foreign Policy Studies at the Brookings Institution's China Center. He previously served as the U.S. National Security Council Director for China during the Biden administration and as a senior China analyst at the CIA.
For those who might not follow Chinese politics very closely, what exactly is this Fourth Plenum meeting and what do we expect to see out of it? You know, when you were in the Biden administration or the CIA, Is this the kind of meeting that you would watch very closely?
Yeah, absolutely. And a big part of the reason that we will watch it so closely is that it's really the most important political meeting of the year. And what the plenum is it's the entire central committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And so what that means is it's the top 200 or so officials from across China, right? Provincial officials, heads of various provinces, key military leaders. For this particular plenum, I think it's going to be especially consequential for two reasons. Number one, on the policy side, the party will kind of endorse the next 5-year plan. It won't be fully finalized until next spring, but we'll get an outline of the next 5-year plan, which will lay the groundwork for China's development in the coming 5 years from 2026 to 2030, which of course would bleed over into Xi Jinping's fourth term. The other big piece of the equation here is the personnel side of the equation. We just saw this last week where a number of members of the military high command were purged, including the Central Military Commission vice chairman, the number 3 officer in the military was purged. And that's the first time that's happened since the start of the Cultural Revolution under Mao. So what's going on the personnel side with the purges, and especially within the military, is really quite dramatic. And it's something that we've seldom seen in the post-Mao era.
You mentioned that the 5-year plan won't be finished until next spring, but there will be a communique coming out of the fourth plenum on Thursday. What do we expect to see in that communique? Will we find out what was said behind closed doors?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because as important as this meeting is, this is not a debating society, right? They've already, to a fair extent, already pre-cooked the outcomes of this. Right. So I think that the documents are important because it is the most authoritative document that you're going to get from the party in a given year. I fully expect, since Xi Jinping is this far along in his tenure, I think he feels very confident in the trajectory of his economic policy and his industrial policy, that this focus on advancing China's techno-industrial prowess, advancing its manufacturing prowess, I think he sees it as being on the right path, even with the problems that it's causing.
This plenum comes just a week before Xi Jinping is scheduled to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump at the APEC summit in South Korea. Do you see any significance there?
I think it's no accident that Xi Jinping scheduled the plenum to occur just before he's supposed to meet with Trump, right? There's no fixed date for the plenum, right, so that he can have this big meeting at home that would enhance his aura of authority going into the summit with President Trump. And what's striking to me as an American and disconcerting is the juxtaposition, right? Xi is going to walk in this meeting having just put his imprimatur on the next 5-year plan for China. And meanwhile, the U.S. government here in Washington may or may not still be shut down.
What about cross-strait relations? Is anything coming out of this fourth plenum meeting or the 5-year plan expected to change China's cross-strait policy or the relations between Beijing and Taipei?
So I don't see the plenum itself having a big impact. One of the things that I am still on the lookout for as we get to the end of the year, though, is that they did a big cross-strait exercise, Strait Thunder, back in April of this year. But it was a Strait Thunder A, which means that they will probably do, like they did last year, a Strait Thunder B at some point. I think the other point of discussion on cross-strait issues that's been more consequential here in Washington, at least, is this discussion about, is Taiwan going to come up in the conversation or in subsequent conversations between President Trump and President Xi? It's switching from not supporting Taiwan independence to actually opposing it, the kind of distinction that might be lost on a leader like Trump, who's not necessarily immersed in these issues. But what I've been hearing more recently is actually the Chinese don't want to set the precedent that this is up for negotiation, right? They don't want to introduce this into the equation because they want to be able to say, we have a principled approach to Taiwan, and so we're not going to talk about this at all with the Americans right now, especially since they don't have that kind of trust in Trump that whatever they agree to, he'll actually stick to it.
That was Jonathan Zinn of the Brookings Institution. Stick with us because coming up after the break, eastern Taiwan is under threat from another barrier lake. We look at how these hazards form.
Playoff baseball is heating up, and every pitch and swing counts. Basketball, volleyball, and football seasons are here, bringing fast breaks, powerful spikes, and thrilling goals. From the locker room to the stands, from key plays to game-changing moments, we've got you covered. Action, highlights, and stories. Game on Taiwan, your home for sports.
Welcome back. You're watching Taiwan Plus News. Taiwan could see lower tariff rates from the U.S. as the latest round of talks is wrapping up.
这个总结会议我们彼此跟美方事实上也大致上方向上有一些共识了所以等于是这个就在等这个会议来召开就可以有 deal 对方向上来讲的话，我们还是期待就是说看起来是有机会的这个关税是可以往下降，那不叠加，这个方向我们来努力。
Taiwan is in the final stage of negotiations with the U.S., which has imposed a 20% tariff on top of existing duties. On Tuesday, President Lai Ching-te said he expects the negotiations to make progress. While the trade talks continue, Taiwan is readying itself for the upcoming APEC summit. Foreign Minister Ling Jialong says the country is preparing for the outcome of a meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping.
我们都有跟着不同的发展的可能的所谓剧本或想定去做一些预判跟应用。
Ling says Taiwan is closely monitoring possible actions by China and maintaining close communications with the U.S. North Korea has fired several short-range ballistic missiles off its east coast towards the Sea of Japan. That's according to the South Korean military. These launches come just a week before this year's APEC summit in South Korea. U.S. President Trump is expected to attend and meet with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung during his trip. Newly elected Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae says Tokyo is communicating with Seoul and Washington, sharing missile data to further understand the situation. This is North Korea's first launch since May. Officials say a large amount of rainfall has caused a newly formed barrier lake in Hualien to overflow, prompting evacuations.
而且在按照它昨天的溢流口，在逐渐的缓慢的在溢流出来。这段时间所做的堤防、河道的疏浚都没有危害。
The new lake, connected to the Mataian River, was formed after a recent landslide. As a precaution, nearly 100 residents in downstream Dongfu village were evacuated and construction equipment was removed. In September, the main barrier lake collapsed and overflowed, causing catastrophic flooding that killed 19 people in Guangfu Township. Officials say the new lake holds around 600,000 tons of water, making it much smaller than the main one.
60万吨其实水量是不大，那从上游下去下到底下，即使全部都下来，大概抬高也是60到70公分。
All emergency measures from the new breach ended Wednesday morning. Now, barrier lakes in eastern Taiwan have become a big cause for concern this typhoon season. But just what are they? Our reporter Sandy Chi breaks it down in a special episode of Zoom In, Zoom Out.
A barrier lake is a natural dam that forms due to landslides, rocks, or other debris. The Mataian River barrier lake in Hualien formed after previous typhoons blocked a valley deep in the mountains. It was only discovered in July. The water behind the dam covered 500 square meters and held 91 million tons of water, 60 million tons of which crashed through Guangfu. What made the Mataian River barrier lake so large and unique? Let's see what experts say.
所以在这里就是说我讲说它在几个大的挑战，在空间、时间跟规模都是非常大的挑战。第一个规模，它大概是全世界前10大，如果不是前5大的话，也有前10大的堰塞湖，也是全世界最大在台风期间降雨产生的崩塌形成的堰塞湖。其他大的堰塞湖都是地震的时候形成的，所以它在这样的一个堰塞湖，它的坝体非常的松散，也有很多高的含水，这是规模。那空间上，它是一个人烟难以到达的一个深山的地方，所以你要去做一些处置是非常非常困难的。也就是说，堰塞湖上面的残坡跟堰塞坝本身，在短时间是很难去降低它的风险的，所以我们在下游就已经开始在8月底，8月已经开始做这个河道的疏浚，河道的降洼，然后把这个降洼的土往这个堤防去 垫高，或是做太空包去垫高，然后也甚至拉高到内政部的层级，等于是已经开始去制定这个疏散范围，跟疏散计划，所以这个工作其实，这个堰塞湖它是一个高的致灾风险的一个堰塞湖，它像是一个不定时炸弹，但是我们其实是有完全大概它后续会怎么发展，它的情节基本上按照我们的预估的这种剧本在走，而且在每个发生的时间点都掌握得很及时，那基本上就是朝疏散避难的方向去走，但是这样的一个疏散避难，堰塞湖的疏散避难，大概也是台湾第一次遭遇到。
But what about alerts, preparing people for a first-of-its-kind disaster in Taiwan?
我们事实上在72小时前就已经通报，48小时前通报，24小时前通报，不同阶段的通报就是不同的预备时间，就是说，比如说48小时就是要叫你准备疏散，你去准备疏散的一些工作，24小时是按照他们的定义已经是要建立强制疏散，所以这个过程其实是有掌握的。
You can watch the full episode on typhoon recovery efforts in Hualien by searching for Zoom in Zoom Out on our website or on our YouTube channel. And thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. Before we go, let's end with this special annual performance in a former military tunnel in Jingmen. I'm Eric Gao. Take care. We'll see you next time.